Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a deeply fascinating philosophical essay by Dan Weber that bridges the gap between our everyday mundane habits and the profound depths of human consciousness. We're looking specifically at a concept he explores called spirit, and it's going to challenge how you view your daily routines, your possessions, and ultimately yourself. It really gets to the heart of why our obsession with spatial objects actually denies our inherent fluidity.
Okay, let's dive right in with a question that might sound a little strange at first, but is actually the key to understanding our entire sense of self. When you think about who you are, do you picture a fixed entity moving through a physical world, or do you imagine something continuous and formless? It's a deceptively simple question, but the way you answer it completely dictates how you experience reality.
Weber sets up our core conflict perfectly here. He highlights the friction between the rigid, physical reality we interact with every day and the continuous, unseen flow of our actual consciousness. He basically argues that by focusing so much on our physical, spatial existence, we inadvertently cut ourselves off from the true, fluid nature of our spirit.
Section 1. Identity as an activity. The architecture of purpose. To really understand this friction, let's start somewhere tangible. Let's start on the beach, looking at a physical, spatial object, a surfboard.
Think about how we actually construct our personal identity. It's usually through a nested sequence of purposeful activities, right? We write an essay in order to pass an exam. We pass the exam to achieve academic status, and we do that to advance our career. Layer by layer, we're building this highly rational, purpose-driven self.
And we see this exact same logic applied to physical objects. A surfboard is shaped specifically in order to ride a wave. You ride the wave to improve your ability, which you do to maybe advance your status among fellow surfers. The physical object is entirely defined by the chain of activities it enables.
So the crucial point is that we don't just stare passively at objects in our world, we appropriate them through use. As the philosopher Martin Heidegger points out, our relationship with things is defined by this in-order-to structure. We wrap our very identity around these familiar, rational activities and the equipment we use to perform them.
But here's where it gets tricky. What happens when everything in your life becomes an in order to? Well, you start to see yourself entirely as just another piece of equipment in a spatial world, and that builds into a pretty unexpected psychological trap.
Which brings us to Section 2, the spatial object trap, becoming rigid in a fluid world. As habitual animals, we naturally crave the subconscious stability of familiar routines. We like knowing exactly how our surfboard will handle a familiar reef break, or how our daily commute will go. It feels safe.
But when we contrast these two states, we see a huge problem. Over-identifying with this rigid, spatial object mindset, being driven by familiar activities, constantly trying to make rational sense of everything, getting trapped in our own crafted narratives, it completely cuts us off from our essential fluidity. We lose touch with that continuous, unobstructed, innate presence that actually connects us to the deeper mysteries of the universe. This is exactly why over-identifying with spatial objects denies our inherent fluidity.
The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard had a rather brutal way of describing this over-reliance on our rational, constructed selves. He saw it as a literal form of spiritual despair. By restricting ourselves to just the spatial and the rational, he argues we strip ourselves of our primitiveness, our innate foundational nature.
I know it seems completely counterintuitive. We are taught to use our intellect to solve problems and find ourselves. But when it comes to locating our deeper spirit, relying purely on our rational mind and our intellectual tools actually acts as a barrier. The very tool we use to navigate the spatial world prevents us from feeling our fluid essence.
Section 3, the ocean swell of consciousness, moving beyond the surface. If our habits and rational structures are the rigid surfboard, then what is our true essence? Weber suggests it's like an ocean swell, a burst of energy traveling completely free of obstruction across thousands of miles of open water.
To ground this, Weber points to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who describes something called transcendental unity. Even though our sensory experiences are chaotic and constantly changing, there is a unified I think operating in the background. It's this underlying continuity that strings all those momentary experiences together into one cohesive self.
To visualize this continuity, the philosopher David Hume used the metaphor of a parade. A parade keeps its overall shape and identity even as individual marchers swap in and out over the years. But Weber uses the ocean swell. A swell isn't the water itself, it's the energy traveling through the water. The actual water particles are constantly changing, just like our daily sensations, but the core spirit,
The swell remains entirely intact.
The theologian Karl Rahner beautifully reminds us of our true position in the universe. Our rational knowledge, our daily routines, our purpose-driven actions, they're all just a tiny floating island. And that island is supported entirely by a vast, incomprehensible sea of infinite mystery. We spend so much time tending to the island that we completely forget the ocean beneath it.
So, this brings us to a critical turning point in this explainer. How do we actually bridge this gap? How do we stop clinging to the island and learn to ride the swell? Well, it requires a terrifying but necessary act of letting go.
Section 4. Disengaging the rational mind, the free fall of faith. To reconnect with our fluid foundation, we actually have to stop trying to navigate spatial relations. We have to shut off the in-order-to-machine in our heads and step into what can only be described as faith.
Heidegger describes a concept called releasement. Now, this isn't about giving up. It's a state of being where your stubborn will and your standard modes of logically trying to conquer and categorize the world are intentionally turned off. It's a deliberate suspension of your rational mapping.
Think about what releasement looks like in practice. Weber compares it to the exact moment a surfer commits to a late drop on a massive wave. You are momentarily suspended in a free fall. You absolutely cannot think your way down that wave. The mind has to stop trying to make sense of the situation, and you simply have to trust your innate, primitive relationship with the water.
As Kierkegaard points out, comprehension, figuring things out logically, is perfectly fine for everyday human tasks. It's how we build surfboards and pass exams. But true faith, true connection to the deeper mysteries or the divine, requires us to momentarily abandon our need for understanding altogether.
All of this builds toward one ultimate realization. If we strip away our daily routines, our career goals, and our rational explanations of the world, who are you, truly, beneath all those stories?
Section 5. Returning to innate presence. Letting go of the story. The reality is, we all tend to borrow ideas from the world around us. We build these complex, defensive narratives just to feel like we have a unique personal identity. Weber compares this to water trapped in a spinning vortex, endlessly circling itself rather than flowing freely.
The crucial takeaway here is that an undisciplined mind gets sucked into that vortex of borrowed ideas, desperately defending a learned narrative because it provides a false sense of security. But your innate presence is still there, waiting. It immediately reclaims its authority the moment you let go of that narrative. Because while wearing an intellectual spatial identity might help you safely navigate public life, it's a completely hollow substitute for the quiet, profound power of actually resonating with the fluid universe.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. Will you spend your life desperately clinging to the familiar shape of your surfboard, or will you finally let go and become the wave? Our habits and routines are useful tools, for sure, but they are not who we are. Look past the spatial objects and the daily grind. Disengage that rational need to control everything, and tap into the profound, fluid mystery of your own existence. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this helps you look at your world and yourself just a little bit differently.